What's up guys, Garcia here, and this is the Sony Xperia Z2. This is Sony's latest flagship device to compete against the S5, One M8, and the G3, just to name a few. Now before we proceed to the review, I'd like to thank our friends at Expanses for letting us use this for a couple of weeks. You can check them out at expanses.com if you want to get yourself an Xperia Z2. Now, one of the issues with the Z1 when it came out last year was the bulky design, and it didn't quite match its top-notch feel, and as a result, it wasn't very comfortable the moment you grab it. The Z2, however, is a different story. It's a lot slimmer, and at the same time, it features the same materials as the Z1. You still get that large bezels at the top and on the bottom, but that didn't really affect the feel of the phone. Although if you were to ask me how it feels compared to, the M8 or the S5, then I'd say it's nowhere near as comfortable as those two. It is still rated as IP55 and 58, which means it's dust and water resistant, so whether you are fancied with that or not, then that feature is there. Now, Sony included some freebies as well in the package, and to be honest, I give them credit for doing that, especially for including a docking station. I mean, I use it every day when charging the phone. That way I don't have to open the flaps. Moving on to the specifications, the Xperia Z2 packs very similar internals as some of the flagships today. There's a Qualcomm 801 CPU clocked at 2.3 GHz, a generous 3 GB of RAM, 3200 mAh of battery, and 16 GB of internal storage, which can be expanded for an additional 128 GB via microSD card slot. It also has a 20.7 megapixel rear camera, which sits behind the G lens, and a 2 megapixel front-facing camera for video calls and selfie shots. Over to the connectivity, it has a Wi-Fi 802.11, a BG and AC, Bluetooth 4.0, NFC, GPS, GLONASS, and Cat4 LTE. Just like any phones running with such a high-end specs, the Z2 has been consistently performing really well. I did, however, experience a few issues on the touch response, but I'm assuming that's more on the software side. But overall, the powerful processor and 3 gigs of RAM really shows how capable they are when they are put into tests. Skipping between home screens wasn't an issue, and of course launching applications was a breeze, and firing up the camera application using the physical button didn't show any slowdown at all. While this may have high-end specs, Sony's overlay also helps the performance on the Z2. It's running Android 4.4.2 KitKat, and you'll start to notice how Sony implemented it by looking at the transparent status bar and software buttons. What I've noticed straight away is the addition of What's New app shortcut when you try and access Google Now. I guess they thought of actually adding it to the home screen, but they knew users wouldn't like that, so they've just decided to hide it in there instead. Heading over to the app tray, you still get the side panel when you slide from left to right, which I still don't get why they've put it there. And I know I've always said this to my reviews related to Sony phones, and those are just my thoughts about it, really. As for multitasking, you still have the options of closing apps individually or all at the same time, which wasn't included on the Z1's software. You can also open multiple tiny system applications and adjust them to your preferred size, kind of similar to QSlide apps. Overall though, I appreciate how Sony is following Google's path on keeping the UI minimalistic, but it does need some improvement still. The Xperia Z1 has a bigger 5.2-inch Full HD IPS display with 424 ppi. Now, remember the backlighting issue with the Z1? Well, that's not the case with this anymore. And actually, since they've released the Z1, then that's when they've finally fixed those issues. Now, it's worth mentioning that Sony's Live Color LED technology is featured on this, which basically produces deeper and vibrant colors. I'll tell you right now that the display on this is gorgeous, and it looks really different compared to other IPS displays I've seen on a smartphone. Although as a default setting, the display is a little pinkish, so more saturation, but because of its wide color gamut, that problem can be fixed by tweaking a few colors. Over to the camera department, it isn't really a major overhaul. It's a great camera phone to be honest, but it doesn't have the same quality as the Galaxy S5 or iPhone 5s, just to name a few camera phones. I mean, it has a great color reproduction in most cases. However, some photos were a little too saturated in high exposed situation. Similar issue to the M7 and M8. Now, I've also noticed that some in their shots had really poor focus, but I guess that's because of the lack of lighting. On outdoors though, the photos had a nice amount of depth of field, and especially when you take macro shots. And then in low light condition, at nighttime in particular, it is one of the best I've used. It's less noisy compared to the Z1 thanks to the much improved post-image processing. Now, it's also capable of 4K video recording, which is probably one of the selling points of the phone, but of course you still get the traditional 1080p video recording. The colors are neutral, and I'd like to see slightly higher highlights and shadows, but you can always bring up the exposure before you start recording. And it's also lacking in sharpness in my opinion, especially for a 4K video, and slightly higher contrast is a must. Video recording in low light is one of the best I've seen, as I've mentioned, but the autofocus really had trouble focusing properly, which is a letdown. But at the end of the day, even though I expected more from it, all those problems I mentioned can be fixed via software update. Well, this wouldn't be a review without talking about the battery life, and I've always been a fan of battery performance on most Xperia devices. The Z2 is no different, and I'm actually really surprised with how well it performed. Whether I'm out or not, the battery always lasts to me. Sometimes I'll go to an event in the afternoon with 70% remaining, and by the time I come back home at night, it will still have around 30% battery life, and I didn't even have to use the battery saving modes for it. And considering I'm actually using the 4G and the camera, that's really impressive. So overall, if you're a light or heavy user, then the battery on this wouldn't disappoint you at all. It's a tough decision which Android smartphone to get, especially that the S5, the M8 and the G3 are here. If you've been using Xperia devices because of its simple interface and just the whole Sony ecosystem, then I'm sure you will be happy with the Z2. However, if you're coming from the Z1, then just stick with it and wait for the Z3. Otherwise, have a browse with other available Android phones on the market. To me, the Z2 is how the Z1 should have been since day one, but sadly it took them that long to fix those issues on the Z1. Overall though, I'm pretty satisfied with the Z2, but I don't think this is something I'd actually keep for 2 years, I guess, if I were to get it on a contract. So there you have it guys, that's the Sony Xperia Z2. What do you think of this compared to other flagships, and would you consider buying one for yourself? Let me know in the comments below. And also, if this video helped you out, then make sure to give this video a thumbs up and share this video to your friends. Subscribe to the channel if you want to see more content from me, and if you want to chat with me, you can follow me on Twitter at Jens Garcia or at Tech for Geeks. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.